The rain fell in cold, slanted sheets, plastering Leo's thin jacket to his skin. It was a cruel, biting rain, the kind that seemed personal. Each drop felt like a tiny pellet of ice, a punctuation mark to the devastating words that had just been hurled at him. He stood on the perfectly manicured lawn, a ghost haunting the edge of his own life. The warm golden light spilling from the windows of the house behind him felt like a mockery. "Get out! Just get out, you useless charity case!" Clara's voice, sharp and brittle, still echoed in his ears. It cut through the atmosphere like a blade, severing the last thread of the life they had built together. Or rather, the life he had funded and she had decorated. Her mother, Eleanor, had stood beside her, a smug, reptilian smile playing on her lips. She held a sleek, designer handbag like a shield, her eyes cold and dismissive. Eleanor had always looked at him as if he were something she had scraped off the bottom of her expensive shoe. Tonight, she had finally flicked him away for good. "We've tolerated you for long enough, Leo," Eleanor had chimed in, her voice dripping with condescension. "Clara deserves a man of substance, not a walking bank account with dirty fingernails." The accusation was so breathtakingly hypocritical that for a moment Leo had been unable to speak. His hands, calloused and perpetually marked by engine grease and hard labor, were the very reason for the roof over their heads, the food on their imported china, and the ridiculously expensive handbag Eleanor was clutching. He worked 2 jobs, one as a master mechanic and another managing logistics for a shipping company, often leaving before the sun rose and returning long after it had set. He did it all for Clara. He had done it all for a dream that he now saw was nothing but a mirage. He had believed her love was real, a gentle flower he had to nurture with his sweat and sacrifice. Now he saw it was a carnivorous plant, and it had finally finished stripping him bare. Or so they thought. His brother-in-law, Marcus, a man whose ambition was only matched by his laziness, had been the one to physically shove him toward the door. Marcus had the soft hands of someone who had never worked a day in his life, yet he pushed with a surprising, vicious strength. "You heard them," he'd sneered, his breath smelling of the expensive whiskey Leo had paid for. Time for the trash to take itself out. They had thrown a single, hastily packed duffel bag out after him. It landed in a puddle with a sad, wet slap. Inside were a few changes of clothes, his toothbrush, and the worn leather wallet that held the entire story of his life. He shivered, not just from the cold, but from the profound, soul-crushing shock of it all. 10 years of marriage, erased in a single, brutal evening. He looked back at the house. It was a beautiful 2-story colonial, their dream home. He had found it, a dilapidated wreck on a large plot of land, and saw its potential. He had bought it outright with the inheritance his parents had left him. A modest sum, but he had been smart with it. Clara and her family had scoffed at the inheritance, calling it pennies from peasants, never knowing its true amount or its purpose. He had poured his soul into that house. Every weekend, every spare hour had been spent restoring it. He'd torn down walls, laid new floors, rewired the entire electrical system. His own hands had sanded the old oak boards until they shone like honey. He had built the beautiful stone patio where they hosted summer parties, parties where he was often treated like the hired help. And now they had thrown him out of it. His house, a car, a flashy new sports car he didn't recognize, was parked in the driveway. A man stepped out from the passenger side and hurried under an umbrella held by Clara. Julian? Leo had seen him at their last party, hovering around Clara, his smile too wide, his compliments too slick. He was everything Leo was not, polished, smooth-talking, and reeking of cologne and unearned confidence. Clara looped her arm through Julian's, laughing at something he said. She didn't even glance toward the curb where Leo stood, drenched and broken. She led Julian inside, into the warmth and light of the home Leo had built. The front door clicked shut, a sound of absolute finality. Leo stood there for what felt like an eternity, the cold rain washing over him. A strange calm began to settle deep in his bones, displacing the initial shock and pain. It was a cold, hard feeling, like a block of granite forming in his chest. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his worn wallet. His fingers, numb from the cold, fumbled with the clasp. He bypassed the credit cards and the few cash bills. He slid out a single folded document from a hidden flap. It was old, the paper soft and creased from years of being carried. The masthead of a county clerk's office was visible at the top. It was the deed to the house. His name, and his name alone, was listed under owner. He had never told them. In the early, happier days of his marriage, he had intended to add Clara's name. But then the small slights began. The casual insults from her family, Clara's growing obsession with status, her embarrassment over his blue-collar profession. Something had held him back. A quiet, persistent instinct for self-preservation. He had kept the deed, and the truth of it, as his secret. He looked from the paper in his hand to the house on the hill. Their laughter seemed to carry on the wind, a ghostly, mocking sound. They thought they had won. They thought they had taken everything from him and cast him aside. A slow, bitter smile touched Leo's lips for the first time that night. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had just been handed a declaration of war he knew he was going to win. They had thrown him out, but they had forgotten one very important detail. You cannot be thrown out of a place that belongs to you. The rain didn't feel so cold anymore. It felt like a cleansing. The game, he realized, was just beginning. The next few days were a blur of logistics and raw survival. Leo found a cheap motel on the industrial side of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and carpets that smelled of stale cigarettes. It was a stark, brutal contrast to the plush, sun-drenched bedroom he had once shared with Clara. The chasm between his old life and his new one felt impossibly wide. He went to work automatically, his body moving through the familiar motions of diagnosing a faulty engine or coordinating a shipping schedule. His colleagues noticed his quietness, the new, hard set of his jaw. "Everything okay, Leo?" his boss, a kind, older man named Sal, had asked. Leo had just nodded, unable to give voice to the hurricane of betrayal and rage swirling inside him. "Family stuff," he'd mumbled, and Sal, respecting his privacy, had let it go. During his lunch breaks, he sat in his truck and replayed the last 10 years in his mind. He saw it all with a devastating new clarity. It was like a film he had been watching from too close, and now, from a distance, he could finally see the whole ugly picture. He remembered their first anniversary. He had saved for months to buy Clara a delicate diamond necklace. He'd presented it to her over a dinner he cooked himself. She had smiled, but it was a thin, polite smile. Later that week, at a dinner with her parents, Eleanor had looked at the necklace and said, "Oh, that's a sweet little starter piece, dear. One day you'll have some real jewelry." Clara hadn't defended him. She had simply blushed and tucked the necklace under her collar. He remembered the countless family gatherings where his job was a recurring punchline. Marcus would joke about Leo showing up to a black tie event with grease under his fingernails. Eleanor would loudly lament how Clara had married down, always within his earshot. They treated his hard-earned income like it was their personal allowance, yet they scorned the labor that produced it. Clara, in the beginning, had pushed back. "Stop it, mother," she would say, though her protests grew weaker with each passing year. Soon she stopped protesting altogether. Instead, she started echoing their sentiments. She would ask him to park his work truck down the street when they had guests. She'd critique his clothes, his manners, the way he spoke. She was slowly being poisoned by her family's venomous obsession with appearances, and she had welcomed it. He had paid for Marcus's failed business ventures, more than one. He had funded Eleanor's frequent shopping sprees and spa weekends. He had paid for Clara to get a business degree she never used, instead spending her days at brunch with friends who all had husbands in finance or law. He was their workhorse, their silent benefactor, and their favorite joke, all rolled into one. And the house. The house was the ultimate symbol of their hypocrisy. They adored the house. They bragged about it endlessly to their friends. "Clara has such an eye for real estate," Eleanor would proclaim at parties. She found this gem and saw its potential. Clara would just smile and accept the compliments, never once correcting them, never once saying that it was Leo who had found it, Leo who had paid for it, and Leo who had bled and sweated to transform it. His inheritance had come from his parents, a quiet, loving couple who ran a small diner their whole lives. They worked from dawn until dusk, their hands chapped, their faces lined with fatigue. But they had been happy. They had loved him fiercely and taught him the value of honesty and hard work. When they passed away in a car accident, the life insurance and the sale of their diner had left him with a sum that was to him a fortune. He hadn't touched it for years. It was sacred. It was his parents' legacy. But when he met Clara and fell in love, he wanted to give her the world. He used that money to buy the dilapidated house, seeing it as the foundation for their future, a testament to his love. He put the deed in his name out of a simple, practical thought. It was his inherited money. It seemed logical. Later that logic would become his shield. The memory of his father, showing him how to properly read a legal document, came back to him. "Never sign anything you don't understand, son," his father had said, his voice gruff but kind, "and never give away what you've earned unless you're sure it's going to a place that will respect it." Leo had failed that last part. He had given his earnings, his time, and his heart to people who had no respect for any of it. But he had not given away the house. That single stubborn act of foresight was now his only weapon. Meanwhile, back at the house on the hill, life was a celebration. Clara and Julian were inseparable. They hosted small, impromptu gatherings, showing off the house as their own. Julian, a smooth operator who claimed to be a day trader, was basking in the glow of his new, impressive surroundings. "You really traded up, Clara," one of her friends said, sipping champagne on the patio Leo had built. "Leo was just so dreary," Clara replied, waving a dismissive hand. "He had no ambition, no drive. Julian understands the finer things in life. We're redoing the entire kitchen, marble countertops, a sub-zero fridge. It's going to be fabulous." Eleanor was in her element planning a massive housewarming party, which was really a party to celebrate Clara's new relationship and their collective social victory. "We need a proper caterer, none of that dreadful barbecue stuff Leo liked," she announced to Clara and Marcus one afternoon, "and a valet service. We want people to be impressed from the moment they arrive." "It's going to cost a fortune, Mom," Marcus pointed out, though he was already enjoying the benefits, having borrowed Julian's sports car for the day. "Nonsense," Eleanor scoffed. "This house is a gold mine. It's an investment in our future. Once Clara and Julian are married, his money, combined with the equity in this beautiful home, will set us up for life. She conveniently ignored the fact that Julian's money was as vague and insubstantial as his job title, and that the house was, in their minds, already theirs. Their arrogance was a fortress, impenetrable and absolute. They never once considered that Leo had any power. To them he was a ghost, a bad memory already fading from view. On the 5th day after he was thrown out, Leo made a phone call. He sat in his truck, the engine off, the folded deed resting on the passenger seat. He looked up the number for a law firm he'd heard of, one known for being aggressive and thorough. "Harrison and Associates, how can I help you?" a professional voice answered. Leo took a deep breath. The cold block of granite in his chest felt like it was finally ready to be carved into something sharp. "My name is Leo," he said, his voice steady and low. "I need to make an appointment. It's about an eviction." The law offices of Harrison and Associates were the physical embodiment of power. Dark wood, polished marble floors, and a hushed, serious atmosphere. It was a world away from the grease-stained floors of Leo's garage or the dingy corridor of his motel. He felt out of place in his clean but simple work pants and collared shirt. He was led into a corner office with a panoramic view of the city. A man in his late 50s with sharp eyes and a perfectly tailored suit stood to greet him. "Mr. Leo, I'm Arthur Harrison. Please have a seat." Leo sat, placing his worn wallet and the folded deed on the vast, polished surface of the desk. The documents looked small and insignificant in the grand, intimidating room. He felt a flicker of doubt. What if he was wrong? What if there was some loophole, some legal technicality he didn't understand? "So," Mr. Harrison began, steepling his fingers, "my secretary said you mentioned an eviction. Are you being unlawfully evicted?" "No," Leo said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm the one who wants to do the evicting." Mr. Harrison raised a curious eyebrow. "I see. And who are the tenants?" "My wife," Leo said flatly, "and her family." He spent the next hour laying out the whole sordid story. He told Mr. Harrison about the 10 years of marriage, his 2 jobs, the constant financial support for Clara and her family, and their endless condescension. He explained how he had bought the house with his inheritance before the marriage. And finally, he told him how they had thrown him out onto the street. Throughout the entire narrative, Mr. Harrison listened with intense, unwavering focus. He didn't interrupt. He just nodded occasionally, his sharp eyes fixed on Leo. When Leo finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Finally, Mr. Harrison picked up the deed. He unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the legal text. He then looked at the date of purchase and the date of Leo's marriage to Clara, which Leo had provided. A slow, thin smile, not unlike the one Leo had worn in the rain, spread across the lawyer's face. "Mr. Leo," he said, his voice rich with satisfaction, "this is what we in the legal profession call ironclad." He leaned back in his chair. "The property was purchased by you with funds that are demonstrably premarital and inherited. The deed has remained solely in your name, in this state, that makes this house your separate, non-marital property. Your wife, Clara, has absolutely no legal claim to it. None whatsoever." The relief that washed over Leo was so profound it almost made him dizzy. The granite block in his chest didn't dissolve, it solidified. It was real, it was strong. "Her name is on the utility bills," Leo mentioned, a lingering thread of worry. "And she'll say she contributed to the household." "Irrelevant," Mr. Harrison said, with a wave of his hand. "Paying for electricity does not grant you ownership of the power plant. As for her contributions, you can demonstrate that you were the primary, if not sole, financial provider for the entire duration of the marriage. Her contributions, if any, will be seen as negligible, essentially rent for living in your property. Rent, which I might add, you never charged. The lawyer's words were a balm, soothing the raw wounds of doubt. "So what happens now?" Leo asked. "Now," Mr. Harrison said, leaning forward with a predatory gleam in his eye, "we formulate a plan, a precise, surgical plan. We don't just want to remove them, we want to ensure they understand the full magnitude of their error." Leo then told him about the renovations, the new kitchen, the talk of marble countertops, the lavish party they were planning. Mr. Harrison's smile widened. "Oh, this is delicious," the lawyer mused. "They are making unauthorized modifications to your property, damaging it in legal terms. Not only can we evict them, but we can also potentially sue them for the cost of restoring the property to its original condition." The irony was staggering. The very renovations they were using to elevate their social status could be the anchor that dragged them into financial ruin. "What do you want to do, Mr. Leo?" Mr. Harrison asked, his tone shifting from legal analyst to strategist. "We can send an eviction notice tomorrow, or we can be more creative." Leo thought of Clara's laugh as she walked into the house with Julian. He thought of Eleanor's smug smile and Marcus's sneering face. He thought of the duffel bag landing in the puddle. He didn't just want them out. He wanted them to feel a fraction of the humiliation they had so casually inflicted on him. "Let them plan their party," Leo said, his voice cold as steel. "Let them finish the kitchen, let them send out the invitations and hire the caterers. I want them at the absolute peak of their arrogance. I want them to feel completely untouchable, and then I want you to take it all away." Mr. Harrison stared at Leo for a long moment, a newfound respect in his eyes. He had seen many clients seeking revenge, but there was a quiet, methodical certainty in Leo that was different. This wasn't just anger, it was justice. "An excellent strategy," the lawyer finally said, a note of admiration in his voice. "Maximum psychological and financial impact. We will let them build their castle of cards as high as it will go, and at the perfect moment we will pull the single card at the bottom." Leo stood up, his posture straighter than it had been in years. He was no longer the downtrodden mechanic from the cheap motel. In this office, surrounded by the architecture of power, he had finally stepped into his own. "Draw up the papers, Mr. Harrison," Leo commanded. "Send the first notice when I give you the word, not a moment before." He signed the retainer agreement without hesitation. As he walked out of the law office and back into the sunlight, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a decade. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was the architect of a reckoning, and it was going to be devastatingly beautiful. The following weeks were a strange exercise in patience for Leo. He moved from the motel into a small, clean-serviced apartment, a temporary headquarters for the coming storm. He continued his work, the familiar routine, a welcome anchor in the swirling currents of his life. But now his exhaustion was tinged with a sharp, electric anticipation. He was a sleeping giant who was finally slowly waking up. He kept his distance, but he heard things. The town wasn't that big, and the circles Clara and her family ran in were rife with gossip. He heard from a supplier at work whose wife was friends with one of Clara's brunch companions. The stories painted a picture of escalating delusion and breathtaking arrogance. The renovations were in full swing. A massive construction bin sat on the edge of the driveway, a testament to the demolition happening inside. Clara had hired the most expensive interior designer in town. She spoke of Italian marble, custom cabinetry, and smart home features. She was spending money with a reckless abandon that made Leo's stomach clench, not with worry, but with a cold, calculating satisfaction. Every dollar she spent was another nail in her own coffin. Julian was a permanent fixture at the house, playing the role of the lord of the manor. He drove Clara's car, the one Leo had paid for, as if it were his own, and made a great show of supervising the contractors, offering his unsolicited and uninformed opinions. He was living a fantasy, and Clara was its willing co-creator. The grand party was the talk of their social set. Invitations printed on thick, creamy cardstock with gold leaf lettering had been sent out. It was scheduled for a Saturday night, 3 weeks away. It was billed as a New Beginnings Gala. The irony was so thick Leo could almost taste it. One evening, his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. He answered cautiously. "Leo, it's me." It was Clara. Her voice was syrupy sweet, a tone he hadn't heard in years. It was the voice she used when she wanted something. "I know things ended badly," she began, no hint of apology in her tone. "But there's no reason for things to be difficult. The divorce papers will be coming your way soon. I just want it to be simple. We'll split everything 50-50. Leo almost laughed. 50-50? He asked, his voice a flat, emotionless monotone. "Of course," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "The house, the savings. We were married for 10 years, Leo. That's the law." She believed it. She genuinely believed she was entitled to half of everything he had ever worked for, including the house she'd just kicked him out of. Her audacity was a marvel. "I'll have my lawyer look at whatever you send," he replied, keeping his voice carefully neutral. There was a slight pause. "Your lawyer?" she asked, a flicker of annoyance in her voice. "Leo, don't be difficult. We don't need to get lawyers involved and make this expensive. Just be reasonable." "I am being reasonable," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Send the papers." He hung up before she could reply. The call strengthened his resolve. She wasn't just content with throwing him away, she wanted to pick his bones clean afterward. She saw him as a mere obstacle to be managed, a problem to be tidied up. The day before the party, Leo drove by the house. He parked down the street, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. The transformation was complete. The house glowed, every window lit. The new landscaping was immaculate. He could see the silhouettes of people moving inside, making final preparations. A large, white event tent was being erected on the back lawn on his patio. He saw Clara directing the workers, a clipboard in her hand, looking every bit the triumphant queen of her castle. Eleanor was there too, pointing and gesturing, a satisfied smirk on her face. It was the pinnacle of their achievement, the culmination of all their scheming and social climbing. It was perfect. Leo picked up his phone and dialed Mr. Harrison. "It's time," he said. "I'll have the server post the notice tomorrow morning," Mr. Harrison replied, his voice calm and professional. "Right in the middle of their party preparations. The timing should be disruptive." "Good," Leo said, and hung up. He watched the house for a few moments longer, a monument to their pride and his pain. Tomorrow, that monument would become a tomb. He drove away without looking back. Saturday dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for a party. Inside the house on the hill, the atmosphere was one of frantic, joyous energy. The caterers were setting up in the brand new kitchen, their stainless steel equipment gleaming under the recessed lighting. Florists were arranging massive bouquets of lilies and roses. Waitstaff in crisp black uniforms moved through the rooms, polishing glasses and setting up bars. Clara was a whirlwind of motion, her face flushed with excitement. This was her moment. This was the day she would finally solidify her place in the social stratosphere. She was shedding her old skin, the embarrassing skin of being married to a simple mechanic, and emerging as a new, sophisticated woman on the arm of the dashing Julian. "Everything looks perfect, darling," Eleanor said, clasping her hands together in delight. "Absolutely perfect. Everyone who matters will be here tonight. They'll see what you've become." Julian swaggered through the living room, a glass of champagne already in his hand at 11 in the morning. "This is how life is meant to be lived, baby," he said, kissing Clara on the cheek. No more settling for second best. At approximately 11:15, the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, insistent chime that cut through the cheerful chaos. Clara, annoyed at the interruption, swung the door open. A nondescript man in a polo shirt stood on the doorstep. "Are you Clara Gable?" he asked, his expression blank. "Yes," she answered impatiently. The man handed her a thick envelope. "You've been served," he said, then turned and walked briskly back to his car without another word. Clara stared at the envelope, confused. She tore it open, her brow furrowed. Inside were several pages of dense, legal-looking text. She scanned the first page, her eyes widened. It was a formal notice, a cease and desist for unauthorized construction, and a 30-day notice to vacate the premises. Her first reaction was disbelief. A joke. It had to be a pathetic, desperate joke from Leo. She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "What is it, dear?" Eleanor asked, bustling over. "It's from Leo," Clara said, rolling her eyes. "He's trying to scare us. He's sending some fake legal papers to try and evict us. Can you believe the nerve?" Eleanor took the papers, and her smile faltered as she read. The letterhead was from Harrison and Associates, one of the most feared law firms in the state. The language was not that of a desperate man. It was cold, official, and threatening. It mentioned specific statutes and codes. It listed Leo as the sole, undisputed owner of the property. This looks real, Clara," Eleanor whispered, the color draining from her face. "Don't be ridiculous, Mother," Clara snapped, snatching the papers back. "He can't evict us from our own house. His name isn't even on the mortgage." "There is no mortgage, Clara," Eleanor said, her voice trembling slightly. "He paid for it in cash, don't you remember?" A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into Clara's consciousness. She had always known in the back of her mind that Leo had bought the house with his inheritance, but she had never considered the legal implications. It was their house because they lived in it. It was hers because she was his wife. That's how it worked, wasn't it? "Marcus!" Eleanor shrieked. "Get in here!" Marcus came in from the backyard, annoyed at being summoned. He read the papers, his usual smirk, replaced by a look of stunned confusion. "What is this? He can't do this." "Call our lawyer," Eleanor commanded, her voice rising to a near hysterical pitch. "Call Robert now." Clara fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking. She dialed their family lawyer, a man who mostly handled wills and minor business contracts. She explained the situation, her voice high and strained. She could hear the lawyer sigh on the other end of the line. "Clara," the lawyer said, his voice grave, "I need to be frank with you. If he bought the house before the marriage with his own inherited funds and the deed has remained solely in his name, then it's his house. It's not marital property. You have no claim to it." The phone slipped from Clara's hand and clattered onto the new marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the suddenly silent room. The caterers had stopped working, their eyes wide. The florist stood frozen, a half-finished bouquet in hand. "No," Clara whispered. No, that's not possible. Panic, pure and undiluted, erupted. Eleanor began to pace, her hands fluttering at her throat. What do we do? What do we do? People are coming in 8 hours, the whole town. Julian, who had been listening from the doorway, suddenly looked pale. The swagger was gone, replaced by a rodent-like wariness. His house? Are you telling me this whole place belongs to your grease-monkey ex-husband? Shut up, Julian, Clara screamed, whirling on him. The cascade had begun. The first domino had fallen, and it was quickly hitting the next. The contractors who had just finished the kitchen renovations had been promised their final substantial payment on the day of the party. The lead contractor, a burly man named Dave, arrived around noon to collect his check. Clara, now frantic, tried to put him off. "We'll pay you next week," she said dismissively. "We're a little busy right now." Dave, who had heard rumors of the family's financial recklessness, was not having it. "The contract says payment on completion. You're having a party that looks like it costs more than my truck. Pay me now, or my boys and I will start taking back our kitchen, starting with the sub-zero." The credit cards were maxed out. The money they had set aside for the party was for the caterers and valet, not the tens of thousands still owed for the renovations. Their entire financial house of cards, built on the assumption of the house's equity, was collapsing in on itself. Arguments broke out, vicious, cutting arguments. Eleanor blamed Clara for being so stupid as to not get her name on the deed. Clara screamed at her mother for pushing her to leave Leo in the first place. Marcus blamed them both for living in a fantasy world. Julian watched the meltdown with a detached, calculating coldness. He saw his dream of a comfortable life, funded by Clara's assets, evaporating before his eyes. The house wasn't hers. The money wasn't there. He quietly slipped out the back door, got into his sports car, and drove away without a word. He didn't even take his jacket. By late afternoon, the party was officially cancelled. Frantic calls were made to the guests with vague excuses of a family emergency. The caterers, demanding a cancellation fee, were packing up their things, casting disdainful looks at the screaming family. The beautiful dream had become a grotesque nightmare. Clara sank onto the floor in the middle of her new, unpaid-for kitchen, her designer dress wrinkled, her face streaked with tears. She was surrounded by the trappings of a life she had stolen, a life that was now being violently repossessed. She had thrown Leo out into the rain, feeling powerful and triumphant. Now she was the one drowning, and the storm was just getting started. The 30 days passed in a haze of legal threats and mounting desperation. Mr. Harrison was relentless. He followed the initial notice with formal filings in court. A hearing was set. Clara's family lawyer was hopelessly outmatched and advised them that their position was untenable. Their only option was to comply and vacate the property. The social fallout was immediate and brutal. News of the cancelled party and the eviction spread like wildfire through their social circle. The story became a source of delicious gossip. The Gables, who had put on such airs, were being kicked out of their own home by the humble mechanic they had scorned. It was a story too perfect to resist. Friends stopped answering their calls. Invitations dried up. They were pariahs. Their financial situation was catastrophic. The renovation contractors, led by Dave, had placed a mechanic's lien on their future assets for the unpaid work. Credit card companies were demanding payment. They were drowning in debt, with no assets to their name. The house, their only real collateral, was a fortress they could not breach. Eleanor seemed to age a decade in a month. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a constant, simmering panic. Marcus, stripped of his access to free-flowing cash and status, became sullen and bitter, lashing out at his mother and sister. The family unit already fragile and built on a foundation of greed, shattered under the pressure. Leo watched it all from a distance. He received a few hysterical, rambling voicemails from Clara. They veered wildly from desperate pleas for forgiveness to venomous threats. He never answered. He never called back. He forwarded them to Mr. Harrison, who logged them as evidence of harassment. Leo's own life was quiet and orderly. He worked, he ate, he slept. But inside, the cold granite of his resolve was being polished to a fine, sharp edge. He was not gloating. He felt a strange, detached sense of grim satisfaction. It was the feeling of a complex machine he had designed finally working as intended. This was not about passion anymore. It was about a necessary and just correction of the universe. The day of the eviction arrived. It was another grey, overcast day, as if the weather itself was mirroring the family's bleak future. 2 sheriff's deputies were present, their expressions impassive and professional. A moving crew, hired by Leo, was systematically removing every item from the house and placing it on the front lawn. It was a scene of spectacular humiliation. The new, expensive furniture, the designer clothes, the boxes of fine china, all of it was piled in a chaotic jumble on the perfectly manicured grass. Neighbors peeked from behind their curtains, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Clara, Eleanor, and Marcus stood amidst the wreckage of their lives, their faces pale with shock and fury. Eleanor was weeping openly, a high, keening sound of despair. Marcus was kicking at a box of his own belongings, muttering curses under his breath. Clara just stood still, her eyes fixed on the front door of the house, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred on her face. And then a car pulled up to the curb. Not a flashy sports car, but a simple, clean sedan. Leo stepped out. He was not the man they had thrown out a month ago. The grease-stained work clothes were gone. He wore a dark, perfectly fitted suit, a crisp white shirt, and a simple tie. His hair was neatly cut. He looked calm, confident, and powerful. He looked like he belonged. He walked slowly up the driveway, his polished shoes making no sound on the pavement. He surveyed the scene, the deputies, the movers, the mountain of possessions on his lawn, and the 3 broken people who had caused it all. Clara saw him first, her hatred ignited. "You!" she screamed, her voice raw. "You did this! How could you?" She rushed at him, her hands clawed, but one of the deputies stepped calmly in her path. "Ma'am, I need you to stay back." Leo stopped a few feet from her, his expression unreadable. "I did this?" he asked, his voice quiet, yet it carried over all the other sounds. "No, Clara, you did this." He gestured around at the chaos. "This is all you. You, your mother, your brother. This is the world you built." Eleanor, her face blotchy and swollen from crying, stumbled forward. "Please, Leo," she begged, the condescension replaced by a desperate, grovelling tone. "Don't do this. Think of all the years. Think of family." "Family?" Leo's laugh was short and completely without humour. "You treated me like a servant. You mocked my work. You insulted my parents. You bled me dry. You were never my family. You were parasites." Marcus stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You have no right to talk to my mother like that." Leo's gaze flickered to him, cold and dismissive. "You have no right to be on my property. None of you do." He finally looked directly at Clara, his eyes locking with hers, and for the first time he let the full weight of his quiet 10-year-long suffering pour into his voice. "You spent 10 years treating me like dirt under your shoe," he began, his voice low and cutting. "You were embarrassed by me, ashamed of the work that paid for your clothes, your brunches, your entire life. You stood by and smiled while your family called me trash." He took a step closer. The deputy tensed, but Leo's posture was not threatening, it was commanding. "But what you didn't know, what you were too arrogant and self-absorbed to ever even consider," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "was that the very ground you stood on, the foundation you built your fake, pathetic life upon, was always and only mine." The truth of it, delivered so coldly and directly, hit Clara like a physical blow. She staggered back, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. It was one thing to read it in a legal document. It was another to hear it from him, to see the absolute power in his eyes. "I worked my fingers to the bone for you," Leo said, his voice rising slightly, filled with a righteous, controlled anger. "I gave you everything, and you threw me out, into the rain, like a piece of garbage." He looked at the house, then back at her. "Well, the garbage is gone now, Clara, and the house is clean." Clara finally broke. A gut-wrenching sob tore from her throat. It was not a cry of sorrow or remorse. It was the feral scream of a spoiled child who had her favorite toy ripped from her hands. She collapsed onto the lawn amidst the ruins of her life and wailed. Eleanor rushed to her daughter's side, glaring at Leo with pure venom. "You'll pay for this. You're a monster." Leo simply turned his back on them. He ignored their screams and curses. He walked past the deputies, up the stone path he had laid with his own hands, and stopped at his front door. He pulled a new key from his pocket. The locks had been changed that morning. He inserted the key, and the lock turned with a satisfying, solid click. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, into the cool, quiet emptiness of his house. He closed the door, shutting out the sound of their wailing and the sight of their public ruin. The war was over. He had won. In the months that followed, the final pieces of the Gable family's downfall clicked into place. Stripped of their home and facing a mountain of debt, their ruin was as complete as it was public. Mr. Harrison, acting on Leo's instructions, had pursued the lawsuit for damages, the unauthorized renovations, with surgical precision. The court found in Leo's favor, adding another crippling financial judgment against Clara and her family. Bankruptcy was their only option. They lost everything: the car, the jewelry, the last vestiges of their lavish lifestyle. Eleanor, a woman who had defined her entire existence by her social standing and material wealth, was a broken shell. She and Marcus were forced to move into a cramped, dingy apartment on the other side of town, the kind of place they would have sneered at in their previous life. Clara fared no better. With no real work experience and a reputation now stained by scandal, she struggled to find a job. She ended up working as a cashier at a discount grocery store, the fluorescent lights and endless stream of tired shoppers a brutal daily reminder of how far she had fallen. The beautiful, arrogant queen of the castle was now bagging groceries, her hands, for the first time in her life, becoming calloused. Leo never saw them again, and he never wanted to. He had his house back, but it felt tainted by their memory. The new kitchen, a monument to their greed, felt cold and alien. The house was no longer a home, it was a battlefield. So he made a decision. He had the entire place professionally deep cleaned, erasing every last physical trace of them. Then he called a real estate agent and put the house on the market. It sold within a week for a staggering sum, its value bolstered by the very renovations that had ruined his ex-wife. The irony was not lost on him. Leo found himself with a significant fortune. The proceeds from the sale, combined with the savings he had quietly accumulated over a decade of frugal living, amounted to more money than he had ever imagined. He could have retired. He could have bought a new, even grander house and lived a life of leisure. But that was never the point. That was their dream, not his. His parents had taught him that money was a tool, not a goal. It was a means to build things, to create value, to help people. He took a year off. He traveled. He saw mountains and oceans, walked through cities where no one knew his name. He rediscovered the quiet, hard-working man he had been before Clara, before the endless striving for a life he never really wanted. The cold granite in his chest slowly warmed, transforming from a weapon of vengeance into a foundation of strength. When he returned, he knew what he had to do. He bought a large old warehouse in the industrial part of town, not far from the garage where he still sometimes worked, just to feel the familiar comfort of a well-tuned engine. He used his fortune to convert it into a state-of-the-art vocational training center. The Leo Vance Center for Skilled Trades offered free training to young people in mechanics, welding, carpentry, and electrical work. It was a place where hard work was honored, where dirty hands were a badge of pride. It was a tribute to his parents and to the values they had instilled in him. He wasn't just the benefactor, he was an instructor, spending his days in the workshop, sharing the skills that had saved him. He found a new kind of wealth, a richness that had nothing to do with bank balances. It was in the gratitude of a young student who landed their first good job, in the hum of machinery and the smell of sawdust, in the quiet satisfaction of building something real and lasting. One afternoon, a woman came to the center to volunteer. Her name was Sarah. She was a high school teacher who wanted to help students with their resumes and interview skills. She was kind, with a quick smile, and eyes that saw the man he was, not the balance in his bank account. They talked for hours, surrounded by the clang of hammers and the buzz of saws. He told her his story, not the sensational parts, but the quiet truth of his journey. She listened, not with pity, but with a deep, profound respect. She didn't see him as a victim or a vindicator. She saw him as a builder. A final scene unfolded months later. Leo and Sarah walked hand in hand through the bustling center. He was no longer wearing a suit or his old, grease-stained work clothes. He wore a simple, clean polo shirt and jeans. He was laughing, a genuine, easy laugh that reached his eyes. He looked at the vibrant, purposeful life he had built from the ashes of his old one. True power, he understood now, lay not in what we display to the world, but in the strength of our character and the integrity of our work. Arrogance and greed were a foundation built on sand, destined to be washed away by the tides of consequence. True wealth wasn't measured in dollars or square footage, but in purpose, in respect, and in the quiet peace of a life well lived. He was finally home,